Welcome, everyone, to part 2 of the Changing Utah Legal Market. Before we get started, I want to cover some housekeeping matters. You have to stay on for the entire hour, pursuant to Utah Supreme Court rules. If for some reason you bounce off and have to sign in using a different identifier, please email me at Lori, L-O-R-I .Nelson, N-E-L-S-O-N @law.utah.edu so I can make sure you get credit. If you have to bounce off, but you can't sign back in, email me and let me know. We will be posting the YouTube and you can get credit for watching the YouTube video. We are going to do this one a little bit differently than we've done them in the past. What I want you to do is use the Q&A feature. Please don't use the chat feature, use the Q&A feature, and we're just going to open it up for questions right from the beginning. Because of the nature of the topic, we're not going to do separate presentations. So please make sure you use the Q&A feature. And if you do, you can like certain questions and those will rise to the top and we'll do our best to get all of those answered. So before we begin now, it's my privilege and honor to introduce you to our panelists for today. Last week we had the local firms and today we have representatives from the national firms who have moved into the Utah legal market. So we have Jess Krannich from Kirkland Ellis, Matt Moscon from Meyer Brown, Peggy Hunt from Greenberg Traurig. Did I say that right? And Justice Himonas from Wilson Sonsini. So I'm going to ask the first question, then we'll open it up to the audience, but we'll just proceed. This will be a conversational presentation. And again, for those of you who are watching, please feel free to ask questions. So my question to the panel is, now that we have so many national firms moving into the Utah legal market, I'd like to get your impressions of what you think this will do to local law firms, to local lawyers, and to local clients.
I'm happy to start up. I see the expanding legal market in Utah as a positive thing for everyone. I think it's a recognition of, the fact that Utah is a growing economic force, that there's a lot of businesses here that have formed here, that have been here for a while, and also that, that there's new businesses that are looking to come in. And so I think that it's only going to create opportunities for everyone. And I think it's also a recognition of the fact of something I think we all can agree on this call, that the student population in this state and the lawyers in this state have been very undervalued for a long time. And I think that it only adds to the community to have some change.
Chip in on what Peggy had to say and just echo one thing and then add another. Completely agree with what Peggy is saying about sort of the undervaluation of the legal talent in this market. I think, part of the impetus for firms like ours looking to set up a presence here is the vibrant business community and just what our state has to offer. But part of it is the legal talent in this market too. I think it's been the case for a long time that you've got, top shelf lawyers in this market that could practice any place they wanted to. And if you were to go to them and say, hey, we'll pay you twice as much and we want you to work in New York City, they would say, no, thank you. I prefer to live and work in Utah. And I think that, recognizing the talent pool here is definitely a motivating factor for these firms wanting to have a presence here. I think it's a real compliment to the quality of lawyer that exists in Salt Lake City. And on the client side too, I think it's a real benefit to Utah's business community. It's become quite obvious to me that we have a business community here that for quite a long time has been outsourcing some of their most substantial matters on both the litigation and the corporate side. There are matters in this community that a certain type of firm, I think, is sort of necessary to service. And what this does is it gives our business community more options for the full spectrum of legal needs that they have. Where there are certain matters, a massive merger or acquisition, it's going to make sense on a certain platform. I bet the company class action case, it's going to make sense on a certain platform. And some of that work, I think, has been getting outsourced. And now the business community kind of has the best of both worlds. They have the opportunity to have a full spectrum of legal services among different legal providers. And they have the opportunity for those kinds of cases that previously were finding their way out of our market to work with firms where they have the platform that they need and sort of the scope that they need, the lawyers that they can drive 10 minutes to an office downtown to have a meeting with.
Judge, go ahead. If you have anything, I don't want to speak over you, Judge.
No, I think Peggy and Jess have done a really good job with that question. And the only thing I would add is I think this is inevitable. It's the final step in the maturation of the Salt Lake legal market. When I started back in the 80s, and there were just purely local firms. And then there was upheaval with the regional firms coming in, and then it settled. And now the national, international firms have come in. There will be some upheaval, and it will settle again. But I think it's just a natural part of the market. And Lori, I see that there was a question asked about, and I don't want to speak for Matt or Peggy or Jess, and maybe they can answer it, excuse me. But the question from one of the attendees was whether the regulatory sandbox had anything to do with the decision to move in. I think almost certainly not. I don't want to speak for anybody else. I think this is really just a product, as Peggy and Jess pointed out, of the market maturing and the talent recognition of talent in this market. And that's the bottom line, and totally independent of the regulatory sandbox.
So I can remember back in the day, we won't talk about how long ago, that I graduated. And there was a worry that because we had two schools pumping lawyers into the market, that we were oversaturated with lawyers. And this ties into one of the questions that's being posed, and that is, are we going to get to a point where we just have too many lawyers and not enough jobs? And Utah and BYU have found access to big law firms challenging. Will employment with those firms become easier now that they've moved in? And will that also, do you think, ease the stress of employment on the larger local firms? So,
Lori, let me answer that, amplifying a comment that I think all of the other panelists, but I'll refer to Jess, had made. And that is, when you take any market in our economy, whether you're selling widgets, refrigerators, cars, legal services, the more choices that are available, the first winner are consumers. When consumers have more options, more choices, they win. Law students are, in a sense, consumers of what firms have to offer and sell. And by bringing a broader variety of firms and opportunities to the market, they win. And it, I think, trickles down and it kind of opens things up, I believe, to all. So I think that Utah is having a moment. It's been reported widely that Utah has the fastest growing economy in the nation, and it's broad based. It's not just in one area. Certain states, when you look around our country, their economy is focused on one industry, and that's not the case with Utah. We have a very healthy and broad based economy, and I think that there's been a realization nationally of what we have to offer, the talent that we have. We have such strong universities here, both undergraduate and graduate level. And I think that what we're seeing, and the judge called it a maturation, I agree with, that has caught the attention of the nation, not just law firms, but industries. And so I think that it does provide better opportunities for consumers of legal services, for students looking to enter this market, because it's opened up our economy and it's bringing a lot of outside opportunities into this market.
Yeah, and if I could just, I totally agree with everything that Matt said. I think we're already seeing that. I mean, last year we hired a 1L out of BYU. This year we're going to hire 2 more summer associates, both from local schools. I think, that, and it's our anticipation that those folks are going to join us and to be part of the firm, whether it's here in Salt Lake or if they desire to move elsewhere, within firms in our platform. So I think we're already seeing evidence of the fact that it has brought in opportunities for students.
I'll finish one just final thought on Professor Aaron's question, which I thought was a great one. I think it does provide a lot more opportunities for students from BYU and Utah. I think there are going to be more jobs available, for one. I think it does provide them access to other offices. I can give examples. We've had people from other Kirkland offices who have migrated to this office over the course of these last 6 months. And we've also seen people who have been looking at this office, but also looking at Austin and Los Angeles, who have made the decision that that's where they want to be. And I think that's going to continue. And I would assume, where all of our local offices in Utah are going to have top shelf talent that are working on both regional and local matters, and in some instances on national matters with other lawyers from other offices. That only provides an opportunity for more exposure for these students, and increases the profile of BYU and Utah. And I think makes it more likely that students from those schools, I think there are likely to be instances, for example, where somebody summers in this office and then says, you know what, I think I really want to be in Washington, D.C. And they decide that there's an opportunity for them in Washington, D.C. and they go work for that office for a while.
What does the normal maturation of a legal market usually encompass? National firms hiring numerous of the local attorneys to do only out-of-state work. And are the attorneys from your offices that come in from other markets licensed in Utah? Are they going to be licensed in Utah? So if you could just hit on those two.
So I imagine this is going to be the same across the board, but if you are going to be, physically present in Utah, with us, you need to have a Utah license. Now we want you to have multiple licenses, but you absolutely have to have a Utah license. I think that the question suggests, I think it's inaccurate to suggest that we're hiring people only to do outside work. That is certainly not our intention. But I do think that one of the things COVID has taught us, right, and it's not just our industry, is we could work effectively from a lot of different geographies. We don't have to be in the same place, and we ought to be accommodating to our workforce. So it opens up the ability for people that are practicing law in this market to practice at the top of their license across, not only across the United States, but across the world.
Absolutely. I want to amplify one thing that Justice Himonas said, and that is, I think there is a misunderstanding that these firms are coming to town only to act as a farm to source labor for their big projects elsewhere. And it's true, I don't know the dealings of these other firms with my colleagues, but I believe that's consistent with my firm, which that is not the case. So we are focused on this economy. I spoke last time about how there's a recognition of what this market now has to offer. And so absolutely, here we all have Utah licenses and are all interested in working with Utah companies on Utah matters. But as was pointed out, we have an opportunity for young lawyers to get on teams and to work across the platform, whether that's in a different state, a different country, to be part of a team that's helping something, and the geography kind of disappears. And so I think that we're offering both of those. But yes, where the rubber hits the road, we are looking for licensed attorneys to be leading the charge, and anyone that is in our office would be licensed here as well.
And I'd love to amplify that too, because I think there's a real misimpression, I think, out there in the marketplace about what these offices are about and what they're going to be doing. The notion that we are, sourcing labor to do solely out-of-state work is just not accurate. Speaking for the litigation group here, which is what I'm responsible for managing, all of our lawyers are either licensed in Utah or taking the Utah bar, and I expect that will continue. I think that, certainly we do have people who are involved in out-of-state matters, but a lot of that is a matter of free choice. I'll give you an example. One of the things that our firm is involved in right now is the most substantial MDL that's ongoing in the country right now that is resulting in bellwether cases being tried in 2-week bellwether trials on a rolling basis. And a lot of the litigators who have joined this office did so in part because they wanted trial experience. And so probably half of our office at this point has had the opportunity to go to trial over the last 6 months on those or other matters. And that's a matter of choice and because they're wanting that experience. At the same time, speaking for myself and others in this office, I have spent more than half of my time in the 6 months that I've been here working on local and regional matters. I think certainly there's opportunity in an office like this where, if you want to work on national matters because you want a particular experience or you want to work in a particular practice area, that's the beauty of having offices in many different cities where you can, have the opportunity to work with partners that are in a DC office and have a particular kind of white collar practice and are practicing before the DC agencies. If that's your thing, it's great. You can do it from this office. At the same time, if what you want to do is stay right here and, do litigation, for example, for some of our most vibrant Silicon Slopes companies, those opportunities are right there too. And as I said at the outset, I think a lot of the really, high degree of difficulty corporate and litigation cases, substantial matters historically have been getting outsourced out of our community. And I think that's now happening less and less. And I do expect that all of our offices will be doing a lot of that work right here.
And if I could just add one more thing, I echo everything that everybody else has already said. But one thing I really want to point out is that all our attorneys are licensed here. All of us have very good practices here in Utah, and regionally and nationally. Everybody in our office has done work in all places. But really what I think when I got involved with Greenberg to join was that they were going to make a deep commitment to this community. Every market that they go into, they make a deep commitment into the community. They expect us to be doing local work. They expect us to be cultivating local work. They expect us to be members of our community. I think that was a big reason why they asked Annette Jarvis and me to head the office, is because of our ties to the community. And so I think that's true probably of all of our firms. And I think that it is incorrect to assume that we're just farming people here.
There is another 2-part question. You guys are going to love this, but it has the same related topic, and that is the fees that Utah clients will have to pay. So with national firms coming into the market en masse, as well as the unofficial reported very high first-year associate wage to be paid by the national firms, that's going to necessarily cause higher hourly rates. So won't that have an impact on the fees that local clients have to pay?
I think it's inevitable that is the salaries go up for people that are practicing law, that in some way translates to higher billing rates. I think that's just economics. That also, though, opens up the opportunity for some that maybe want to practice and offer, compete by offering more competitive rates. I mean, it's the nature of our business.
I agree. And in fact, I'll go back when I made the claim that more choice that in any market, that the consumer is the winner when that happens. And as the judge was just stating, all firms can't be all things to all people. And so there may be a firm that says, we're going to specialize in this area that these other groups of firms are not targeting. and they may actually have a better margin than some other firms may have doing a very high-end work. I'm not saying that's the case. I'm saying it may be. And if you look in any other market, if you look at cars, for instance, there are times when selling a used car at a low price, you can actually get more of a margin than a new car at a higher price. And there will be firms that target and the need for legal services at, I think, all levels, all across the spectrum. And so I don't think that necessarily there's going to be, all attorneys disappearing from one segment of the market. I think that you will necessarily have more specialization, people kind of targeting aspects of the economy that they want to service. And to the judge's point, it's true that, as we see in other industry segments, prices will go up as they are in all things here, across the economy. But I disagree with the notion that there won't be access to justice for people with a low dollar level problem. I disagree with that.
I agree with that. I mean, I think that we're talking about firms that are servicing different practice areas and different market segments. And the other thing that I would add, I've heard the opposite perspective from colleagues in many local firms. Utah billing rates, frankly, for particularly a lot of the higher end work that was being done in this community have been a screaming deal for a long time. So in many ways, from the standpoint of Utah's legal industry, probably we had a market that was somewhat of a bubble, somewhat depressed, and we saw 2 decades ago, beginnings of changes in compensation being paid to associates on the New York structure. And it took a long time for that to filter down to the Utah legal market. And then, there was a lot of differentiation there, right? Where, New York firms made moves and it took several years for that to be reflected in what was happening here. And then we were on a totally different salary structure. And I think what we're seeing here is something that I'm going to echo what Justice Himonas said, I think at the beginning. This is sort of a long overdue recognition of what our state and what our legal industry here has to offer.
Now, I just add to that by saying, different clients will pay different rates for different things. And so there's always going to be those clients that want to pay the higher rates for the specialized services or for the access to certain types of markets or whatever it is. They're always going to pay those rates. There's certain clients who don't want to pay those rates, and they'll be looking for firms in that price point. And then there's the access to justice problem, which frankly has been a huge problem in our state, even at the current depressed rates. So that's a whole nother issue that is separate and distinct from the fact that rates may increase because of the presence of our firms.
Have your rates increased since you moved?
Sure.
Yeah.
Significantly? Are you guys, I guess the better way to rephrase this is, are you guys charging somewhere in between what it was and what's being charged on the coasts, or did you automatically go to coast rates?
Speaking for our firm, we don't have differentiation in terms of associate salaries or billing rates. I mean, we have standardized billing rates, and there is some flexibility in them as there is in most firms. But we don't have people in the Salt Lake office who are being paid differently or on different billing rates than people of commensurate experience in other offices.
Same is true with Wilson.
So following on that comment about rates, consolidation is generally not good for competition. As a legal services consumer, this person is concerned about local or regional firms being decimated by the national firms coming to Utah, with national firms in some cases seeing record profits. What do you think this will do to the local firms?
Personally, I would be very surprised if that's the case. I mean, I think, maybe some of the result here is that we see some differentiation in terms of firms, with more national firms and then local firms, and maybe less in between. But I think maybe just to put a finer point on what Peggy was saying a minute ago, let me give the example of corporate work. An IPO involving a Vivint or a Qualtrics is not the kind of thing that was likely going to be done by a local firm even 4 or 5 years ago, right? And so you've got certain deals that are going to go to one end of the spectrum, as they have been. The difference now is that you've got firms here that have lawyers sitting in Salt Lake that can service those things. There's a whole spectrum of other deal work that is going to make far more sense to be done by local firms, and I think is still going to go to those local firms. There are entire practice areas that just make a lot more sense on a different model. I don't know about the rest of you, but we don't have here, sort of a full-fledged employment practice, where you've got a bunch of lawyers who have, a captive client that's a large employer, and they're doing, all of the employment cases that are being generated within that company. That's a type of practice that I think probably makes more sense on a certain model. And it's less the big firm model. It's not to say that if you're interested in that kind of practice area, you'd have no opportunity here, but it's a smaller group, and they're doing that kind of work that is at a different end of the spectrum. I have an associate here in this office who's done a number of cases that are more sort of executive level employment issues. I think if you wanted to have a practice where what you were doing is, working directly with a local client that's a large employer and handling, the volume of their employment work, that's an example of something that makes sense on a certain model that is probably not the big firm model.
I don't really, the question presumes that there's consolidation. I don't really see this as an issue of consolidation. I think that, that there's global firms that have entered the market, and that there's, national firms and local firms or regional firms in our market that exist. And I don't see those firms going away.
Lori, I want to add two things to this. I started practice in this market many years ago. I was at a local firm then called Bancott Bagley. Today it exists as Fabian Bancott. I left that firm, it's been over 20 years ago, and I went to a regional firm. At that point in time, there weren't really international firms in this market, but this same conversation happened because Stoll Reeves, Holland and Hart, any number of these regional firms came to the market, and there was the same question: what is going to happen to the local firms? Fabian Bancott is still very well regarded, is still here. They do a great job for their clients, I'm sure. Even though the market has kind of matured, as Justice Himonas said, and that hasn't, changed the fact that they were able to service their clients, notwithstanding the introduction of these other firms into the market. So I guess I don't think that it's going to have the impact that the questioner assumes it necessarily must have.
Okay, here's again a couple of related questions. Although the growth of Utah's legal industry creates exciting opportunities, this changing market is creating hesitancy for the small and medium-sized firms to expand and hire students. Well, this is going to be like 3 interrelated questions. How do your firms uplift the local students and attorneys, as well as support the smaller firms who are integral to Utah's community? So if your firms are hiring students at certain rates, how in the world will a small firm compete with those rates? And also, how does this impact the government attorney sector, if anything?
Look, if I were a student and you were asking me, would I prefer Wilson and Kirkland and Greenberg and Mayor Brown to come into this market or not, I'm going to unambiguously tell you, yes, please. I want more competition for my services. And it is going to result in increased pay. It has already. As I said, that will, at a certain level, is going to get translated into increased fees, sure. But that's the nature of our business. And there'll be others that are going to offer different experiences, right? Okay, maybe I'm not going to pay you as much money, but you're going to come to work here and I'm going to give you a lot more trial experience perhaps, or, maybe your mentorship will be more bespoke. I mean, it's hard to know where those competition points are going to kind of all shake out. But what I'll say is, look, I think this has happened before. I think to Matt's point and Peggy's point, right, in the mid-90s with the mid-level firms. And I'll bet you if anybody went out there and did a study of the number of law firms, regional and small firms that existed before that kind of shift and afterwards, you would not find any consolidation or diminishment in competition. And I think that there's some fear that when you have a market upheaval, but that not been borne out so far. And overall, very good for the students, from my perspective.
But I think it goes without saying that there's no way the government can pay attorneys at the same rate. So how will government attract the best and the brightest?
Yeah, so there's still a lot of folks, though, that maybe just want to do trial work, right? I mean, if doing it all over again, if I were to do it all over again, I probably would step out differently, and maybe I go straight to the DA's office or to LDA and try a ton of cases. Right? There are other advantages that are offered that private practice can't offer. Right? So you're not competing on salary in that case, but you're competing for something else.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No,
I don't think it's any different than how it's always been. I mean, there's folks who want to go do public service right out of law school, and they know they're making a sacrifice in pay to go do that, or to clerk, or or to work for a nonprofit. These are choices that we make, and I just don't think that it changes at all with us being in the market.
So what do you see are the challenges and opportunities for Salt Lake and the Salt Lake offices of the large national firms?
Well, to an extent, we're unknown, right, to the market. Each of us represents a firm that has either been here a short period of time, or for Wilson Sonsini, they were here and then they've kind of reemerged. And so there are always challenges with that. But I think each of the firms represented by the panelists here bring something to this market. So the opportunity is really looking at the consumer of the legal services and giving them opportunity to access literally the best and the brightest in particular areas. And it may be something where they feel like, hey, we don't need that for whatever this thing is. Jess used the example of an employment problem. But for some very complicated matters, it's going to allow them to access just some phenomenal talent. And the challenge that we have is making ourselves known to the local market and to overcome some of these, some of the questions you've raised, I don't think have been asked with evil intent. It's just an assumption. Big firm, you must charge 3 times as much. And that's something in marketing that we're going to have to overcome. And I'd like to point out the fallacy of that, by the way. I have had examples where if I get asked a question and I don't know the answer, and I have to spend hours researching it and running up a tab on Westlaw, even if I'm charging a lower hourly rate, the total price to the customer, my client, is significantly more than if I'm able to turn to an international resource that deals with this time and time again, and they know the answer to the question immediately, and I can find it and find the correct answer nearly instantly, even at a higher hourly rate. The cost going to that client, that consumer of legal services, is actually less. So I don't think it's automatically a more expensive proposition. It can be, it doesn't have to be. But those are some of the opportunities and challenges. We are giving the local market something that they haven't had access to previously, but we have the challenge now of making sure that the local market understands what it is that we have to offer.
I'll chime in on Professor Holbrook's question, and Jim, great to see you on the chat. Yeah, I think one of the challenges that we face coming into this market, candidly, is misinformation, or maybe just a misimpression based upon, hearsay or information gathered from places online, like Above the Law, about what an experience in big law is like. And I think that I certainly have a lot of conversations with students and other lawyers in the community about that, answering questions about things like, am I going to be working in an exorbitant amount? Am I going to be able to have a life? Am I going to be able to do pro bono work? Am I going to get the kind of experience that I would if I was to go onto a different platform? And so I think there are challenges associated with that, right? Because I think there's a lot of hearsay out in the world about what a big law experience is like. I think there are lots of conversations being had, and folks that don't have experience in big law speaking based upon just kind of what they've heard and not what they've actually experienced themselves. On the kind of experience you get in a big law firm, for example. I keep sort of getting this question about, like, am I going to get the chance to really do things? Am I going to get good training and mentoring? I think that, there's a phenomenal experience there to be had at all of our firms. One thing you get on a platform like this is, the training is very, very intentional and well-structured. There are a lot of resources behind it. Litigation associates at Kirkland, for example, there is a mock trial program where they are doing a mock trial with a real jury and with real experts. And they're doing everything from witness preparation to opening to closing. And they do that every single year that they're an associate. And the resources get put into that to training people how, to do it the right way. There are people who came to this office who were debating opportunities to go to the U.S. Attorney's Office from another Utah firm because they wanted to try cases. And they made the judgment that they were going to get more trial experience here. And the person I'm thinking of is now, been at trials during the short tenure here. And so I think the notion that, you're not going to get good experience, you're not going to get to do things, I don't think that's an accurate representation of what practice is actually like here. I think that, sure, those examples are out there. You can always find somebody who says, I went and I worked for a firm in New York and I billed X number of hours and I did, so much of it doing document review. But I think that those experiences are not representative of, what people across the spectrum are getting the chance to do here. The majority of the litigation group in this office has now done multiple depositions over the course of the last several months. And I'm talking about associates ranging from 1 year of experience, up to 7. And so I think, sort of correcting some of the information that is out there. I'm just constantly getting questions about, things that I think are sort of online bad impressions of big law, and are not really reflective of what practicing, law at our firms actually looks like.
Yeah, and I'd echo that.
Sorry, go ahead, Peggy.
I'm sorry, I'd echo that. I mean, one of the questions is what is the required billing time? It's 1850, which has been the same time that I've seen in all the firms. I've been in a local firm. I've been in a national firm. I've been formerly in an international firm. 1850 is pretty standard, I also, think that, as Jess mentioned, you get phenomenal training. I mean, phenomenal. We have programs very similar to what Kirkland Ellis has, and it is very intentional and very well thought out. And you also get terrific mentoring. I mean, there's very well-formed mentoring programs here at GT. In this office, we do what are called mentoring families, and you're, getting mentoring from shareholders and other associates, as well as in this office, as well as in our Denver office. We are encouraging everyone to do pro bono work, and it's sophisticated pro bono work. You could be doing pro bono work in this community if you want, or you could be working on cases to help people in Ukraine. I mean, and you get billable time for that. We give up to 50 hours of billable time for, actually, I think we give 100 hours of billable time for pro bono matters. As far as working in your community, we give 25 hours of billable time for being involved in local nonprofits and community services and things like that. We are working very carefully to make sure that our firm is very inclusive and has a diverse workforce. And we have programs within the firm that encourage that. And we actually give billable time to participate in those programs, as well as in programs in our community that are meant to foster a more inclusive workplace. So these are all just examples of what our firms provide to associates, and I think it would be a phenomenal experience. It's evolved quite a bit since the time when I was at LaBeouf. I started my career in the 90s at LaBeouf, Lamb, Green, and McRae, and it was a very different world then. I think Big Law has evolved. It recognizes that to attract the brightest and the best, it's going to have to provide some benefits that, like the ones I just mentioned.
So there seems to be a labor shortage, and with the big national firms coming in and hiring many of the attorneys to live here but do work out of state, this magnifies the labor shortage and drives up fees and rates, making it more likely that individuals and businesses simply cannot find legal counsel. Do you think that is a justified concern?
So,
I don't either.
Peggy was right earlier when she said the access to justice problem is independent of what's happening with us coming in. It doesn't matter to the individuals or the small businesses whether you're charging $400 an hour or $800 an hour. Those folks aren't able to access lawyers at the lower level, even significantly lower than 400 or whatever it is, right? So you've all heard me say over and over again, I mean, we have study after study that puts it at about 86% of the legal needs of our citizens are unmet. And it doesn't get worse because you've got Big Law coming in. And in many ways, our firms are doing a better job of helping try to crack the access to justice nut. Right? And the examples about incentivizing the pro bono work, for example. I mean, another one. I mean, I know Wilson has an entity called 650. 650 has, as I understand it, over 20,000 free services to people that are at risk of losing their homes or their apartments. So with the A2J issue that the question kind of hints at is independent and needs us to act in a very different way. And it's not made, in my view, any worse about whether the national firms come in or don't come in. And it's not a unique problem to Utah. It runs the globe.
Laura, the other thing, the question, I was just going to add, the question also assumes something I think we've all tried to rebut, which is that these big firms are coming in and taking Utah students and then pivoting them to do solely national work and not work on the needs of Utah clients. And that is, I'm convinced by what I've heard from my colleagues on the panel, but I can just tell you from my firm, that is not the case. There are opportunities to get involved on projects and platforms that are outside of the state, certainly. But the work that we brought with us here that we are doing on a daily basis are for clients in this market. And so the hiring that we're doing is for people to be working in this market. So by changing the address, I don't think is really adding to the problem. So I think the question starts with an assumption that I just disagree with.
100%. I think I've got about a dozen active matters right now. One of them is an out-of-state matter. And that's a matter where I run a team that is, handling a substantial piece of an MDL in the Northern District of California. And all of the rest of the matters that I'm responsible for are matters that are local, regional matters involving either Utah-based or regional clients. So again, I think what Matt said is spot on. I think there are opportunities to do all kinds of things here. I have a partner. I used the white collar example earlier. I've got a very highly talented partner who's in the process of moving from our DC office, who has a white collar practice and practices with cases involving the various regulatory agencies in DC. It's a phenomenal opportunity for somebody in Salt Lake who wants to do that kind of practice, to live and work here and get the opportunity to do more of those kind of cases than I think you probably otherwise would in this marketplace. But that doesn't mean that all of the work that we're doing is outsourced work for stuff that's out of state. I think it's more of an opportunity issue.
So how many clients did you see stay with you as you transitioned? And how did you approach the conversation over your cost increasing by a multiple of your prior hourly rate?
I'm sorry, just looking at the question.
I was going to talk. I'm just going to start with an assumption that all of Judge Himonas' clients stayed with him. But in my case,
well played, Matt.
The clients that I was working with, I was very fortunate to have join me. And so it wasn't a choice that they were forced to triple their rate or, choose to go work with someone else. So I feel fortunate that I was able to keep all of the work that I had ongoing and bring that over. Now, of course, that's an individual choice, client by client, or an attorney by attorney, rather than this firm and that firm kind of question. So I was very fortunate in that regard, but I don't know, you can say that this is a big law versus a regional or local law kind of question. But I agree. I wanted to emphasize, one of the things that Jess was talking about is opportunities at firms like these just exist in ways that they don't exist at smaller firms. Not because the smaller firms are populated with people that aren't as smart or aren't talented. That's not the case. Certainly, I am not here saying people that are at small firms are not as smart or not as hardworking or not as diligent. One of the associates that we've had join us very recently came to us from a local 5-person shop. That person has come here and is now working on our global appellate practice. Mayor Brown, one of the things that is interesting about our firm is that as a firm, we've argued more cases before the United States Supreme Court than any other firm. This attorney now is working with that group and working on briefs before the United States Supreme Court. That is an opportunity that you would not have just at a different firm. But that's something that, we didn't need to hire him, out of Harvard to do that or anything else. He came from a very small local Salt Lake firm because he was that good, that smart already at his existing firm. But coming to a platform like this just gave him an opportunity that he wouldn't have otherwise had. But again, it's the training that he had here locally that honed his skills to allow him to transition into that space. So I think that the local firms here are populated with wonderful attorneys doing great work for great clients. The schools that we have in this market are phenomenal schools and create attorneys that are just very well trained and are very ready to enter at a very sophisticated level. And these firms have recognized that, and that's one of the reasons that they're coming here now.
So Professor Holbrook asks, will the Salt Lake offices of large national firms have lawyers with expertise in Russian invasion, sanctions compliance, or will they supply that expertise from their, for example, DC offices?
So I think that is going to change and vary from firm to firm, just depending on where some of the partners are located. But what it does do is it gives people here, let's say the firm doesn't have a partner with expertise in the Vienna Convention, but somebody in DC or New York or LA does. There's an opportunity for those individuals to work on those matters because of that connection wherever they're situated. And I'm repeating what everybody has said, but one of the advantages is there is a platform that exists at the national, international level, and that folks haven't had really the ability to crack in Utah, that they now can. And they can perform work not just across Utah, not just across the United States, but really across the world, and gives them access to an entirely different set of potential problems and clients.
So there's one last question I want to get to, but before that, I want to ask this. Are you hiring across practice areas, or are you hiring specific practice areas? For instance, do you guys ever hire family law attorneys, which was my area?
Yeah, I think it'll vary from firm to firm in that particular case. Right?
Because when we ever had an international custody case, we got our advice and expertise out of Chicago. So
the different firms here have different, I would say, different areas of emphasis. To a certain extent, some have certain practice groups, others don't have some of the practice groups. I don't foresee that we're going to come in and hire people in family and domestic law, but others might.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%.
So,
I think that goes a little bit. There was a question a little bit ago about, a lack of access to justice and how it's going to impact the local firms. And I think, from the standpoint of practice areas that we don't service, I think it's inverse for the local firms. I've had a number of experiences recently where something like what you're talking about, there's a request for a referral bouncing around the firm. And, we very, very readily recognize, we don't do that. We don't have people here in this office that are doing that particular kind of work. And so we're reaching out to our network of colleagues in the community and making sure that those matters where we get hit with that kind of a referral request is finding its way to the best of the local practitioners who do that work.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, I get those requests pretty much every other day, to be quite honest. Yeah.
So this is from another one of our professors. A couple of times, Mr. Moscon has mentioned that new big law firm branches will be good for Utah consumers, but the largest group of consumers litigating in Utah state courts are insolvent, low-income consumers sued in collection cases on subprime loans with interest rates of around 300% per annum. These cases overwhelmingly lead to default judgments, have virtually no functional appeal rights, and lead to thousands of bench arrests against borrowers every year. Utah's laissez-faire regulatory environment has attracted some of the banks and technology companies that are providing demand for elite corporate law practice. Do partners at big law firms also have a responsibility to work for substantive legal reforms that benefit struggling low-income Utah consumers?
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. I mean, that it is an enormous problem. There's no question about it. And it doesn't matter where you're practicing. You have, I think, a moral obligation, given the rights and privileges that we enjoy, to participate in making the system better and more accessible for all. I mean, across the board. And it's not just, you've all heard me say it 100 times, it's not just about doing pro bono work, although that's incredibly important, but it's about changing the legal landscape, this ecosystem, so that those underpinning correct facts don't exist. Right? And it's not going to be made better or worse because big law has come in. Right? I mean, for my own purposes, I just say that one of the things that I was incredibly important to me, and be clear that I wanted to continue my active participation in the Access to Justice movement. And the response was, not only will we let you, but we damn well expect you to. Right. And I'm going to tell you, I don't think that's unique. I think that all of the people on this call are under that same kind of instruction.
Absolutely.
One of the first things that I was on a video conference with the global chair of my firm just for this past week, who pointed out, not just to me, but to everyone, that he is doing his share of pro bono work and how that is expected of all of us here. And it's not, as you just heard again, just about pro bono. It's about being involved in the communities that you're in, being a responsible citizen. And so I agree with what the judge just said, which is the problem that's identified is not here because big law is here. That problem was here when regional law was here, and that problem would be here with local firms. Indigent clients that need help without respect to the number of attorneys and where on the AmLaw chart they reside. And the actual, I think, truth of fact is that there are resources behind these firms that have previously been unavailable to the low income consumers of legal services in this market, that these firms should, and I believe will, bring into this market to help. But that is an obligation that all of us have in the legal industry, whether you're a solo practitioner or a member of the AmLaw 50.
Yeah.
That's right. I mean, all of our firms have policies that are designed to make our firms and our lawyers really responsible corporate citizens. And I think we take that seriously. And I think we take investing in the local community to accomplish that seriously. I'm supervising 2 associates right now who are involved. One of them is doing a pro bono case for an indigent client on a debt collection issue. The other is handling a Ninth Circuit appeal for a prisoner. And again, it's in both instances where these clients otherwise would have no access to justice, and being able to have the resources of something like that available to help these people, I think is just a tremendous opportunity that likely otherwise wouldn't exist. The firm, I think you've heard from all of us, all of our firms are really pushing pro bono. It's a requirement here. Those hours are tracked, by office. There are awards given. People get billable credit for it. I saw an email coming around yesterday looking for help staffing from this office on working with Ukrainian citizens on immigration issues. So I think those opportunities are plentiful, and we're always looking for ways that we can help in the local community, and lawyers who have interest to bring their time and their energies on a pro bono basis to those things.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I think all of us are attorneys who have spent a lot of time on community service. I personally have been involved in access to justice issues since the beginning of my career. I would not have joined a firm that wouldn't allow me to continue to do that. And I think most of the people here in my office have similar commitments. So I think that, the issue of being responsible is just baked in, as Jess said, to our firm's DNA. And it's in our DNA. I think we're all working on it.
So one last question. We have the Utah Rules of Civility and Professionalism, which I don't know if they're unique to Utah, but is your ability to comply with those rules up to you, or is that going to be dictated by whoever is in charge in some other state?
You're going to be practicing in Utah. You've taken an oath. You're subject to the Utah Rules of Professionalism and Civility to a T. And there's no outside pressure whatsoever to suggest that you should part from that. It just doesn't exist.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if anything, I think there's an effort to go above and beyond in complying with those. I mean, one of the first things that I helped with when I came on board last October, I got a question from our general counsel's office in Chicago about who would be best to work with in the local community on, sort of getting fully up to speed and implementing those types of compliance policies in this office. And so we've actually hired an attorney from another of the local firms who is working as a resource and worked with our general counsel's office to make sure that that got embedded, in our operating procedures here. I think that's probably not unique. There are plenty of states that have similar, sort of obligations of professionalism and civility in addition to the ethical rules. I think Utah's kind of been at the forefront of that, and I think it's a great thing. I think it's great that they're enforceable, as a matter of law, but I don't think Utah is unique in that fashion among the states in which our firm practices, and we take complying with those very seriously wherever we practice.
Before we sign off, Lori, can I just say thank you for the opportunity to be here and speak for myself, but for everyone I know. I'd be happy to continue these conversations offline anytime. I'm interested in the dialogue and totally open.
Well, I want to thank you, and we've had a number of our attendees also submit thank yous. So I really appreciate it. It's an important conversation, and I think it's something that you're right, we should continue to talk about. I do think that the market is going to be weird for a little while, but it will adjust and level out, and it will work out. But thank you all for doing this. I know it can be challenging and it takes your time, and I really, really appreciate it. And I appreciate all of you who were able to participate in this. Thank you again, everyone.
And thanks for the questions.
Yeah. Thanks, Lori, for moderating. Thanks, everyone. This was fun.
Thank you. Have a happy weekend.
Thanks.
You too.